Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the importance of saving a life. On a Saturday, in the midst of the war being waged between Ukraine, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett had a sit-down, face-to-face 3-hour meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Bennett was granted the meeting because it is said Israel, the Jewish state, has the trust of both Russia and Ukraine. Bennett is an Orthodox Jew. This meeting was so important that Naftali Bennett broke the Holy Sabbath to meet with the man ravaging a neighboring country and killing its citizens. According to Jewish law, breaking the Sabbath is a significant violation. In fact, the Torah excoriates those who break the sanctity of the Sabbath. On numerous occasions, the Torah proclaims that the punishment meted out to a Jew who violates the Sabbath is death. The Sabbath begins 1 hour before sundown on Friday and concludes 25 hours later when 3 stars appear in the Saturday night sky. During those 25 hours, electronics, trains, planes, automobiles are off limits, verboten. It is time when those of us who are observant realize that we are in control of machines and technology, and that machines do not control our lives. It's a welcome break. But there is an exception, if you please, that is a dictum to save a life. The same Jew is required to break Sabbath, required to save a life. Why the exception to the law? The answer is clear. The sanctity of human life is more important than everything else, everything, even a direct command of God. And one should break the Sabbath so that future Shabbatot, future Sabbaths, can be observed. And so, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, a Torah-observant Jew, got on his Israeli plane and flew to mediate between Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky on the Sabbath. Everyone on the plane with the Prime Minister was there to participate in the same effort. They, too, broke the Sabbath. Big time broke the Sabbath to save lives. Bennett had a mission to accomplish. Mediation was one aspect of his visit to Russia, but there was much more expected of him to accomplish while there. His real task was to evaluate the Russian president in the moment. The Israeli Prime Minister was there to uncover Putin's real red lines, and he was there to evaluate Putin's state of mind and determine his flexibility. Bennett was to read Putin, the proverbial closed book, and to report back. A daunting mission. Indeed, we know Putin's demands have been articulated to Zelensky. And we know that what Putin wants, what he is demanding, will be very painful for Ukraine, but they will allow for a peaceful settlement to this blood-drenched conflict, and they will allow Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to retain his position and to remain in power. The terms that Vladimir Putin has set for Ukraine are probably similar to those he set during his 2014 conflict over Crimea. It's an all-or-nothing settlement. And according to Bennett's assessment, Putin is dead serious and unmoving in his demands. The Russian president does not care about the loss of human life, let alone the destruction of property, landmarks, humanitarian facilities. For Putin, the numbers are not relevant. If his demands are not met, Putin will continue to pound and pulverize and even destroy Ukraine. Zelensky has a choice: to accede to Putin's wish or to accept the consequences. If Putin's demands are met, the following will probably happen. This is interesting. Ukraine will swear off the desire to join NATO. That means they have to change the constitution. Ukraine will shrink its army. It will become neutral. It will act like Finland and Iceland. It will not align with either NATO or the West. If Ukraine does not accept the demands, the result could be the deaths of thousands more Ukrainians and the end of what we now know as Ukraine. It might take a few weeks, it might take a few months. Ukrainians are fighters, determined to hold strong and defend their country. But are they stronger and more determined than Vladimir Putin, a man committed to his plan and unconcerned about the losses to his own legion of soldiers and people? Putin doesn't care. Zelensky does care. Whatever Vladimir Zelensky decides, he's a hero to his countrymen, a hero to the free world. He has touched the souls of men and women of Ukraine and the world. He has energized his population, and they have fought valiantly and bravely, exacting a heavy price on Russia. So did Bennett violate the Sabbath to save lives, or was it futile? Only time will tell. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is an editorial from CBS News from Sunday, March 13th, 2022. The piece illustrates just how difficult it is to convince Russians of the horrors being perpetrated by their own army in Ukraine. It's hard to imagine, in this era of the internet, that propaganda spewed forth by Putin is so overwhelming, but it is. The piece is called What Russians Can See of Their War Against Ukraine. The piece is unauthored. It's a transcription. It's a very powerful piece. This is how it begins. Just days after Russia began its unprovoked attack on cities all across Ukraine, 22-year-old Yulia Tymoshenko called her relative in Moscow. I told her about spending a night in the basement of our building in Kyiv, waking up at 4 a.m. to the sounds of explosions and fighter jets. My aunt told me, "Well, you don't know who did that." "Really?" asked the correspondent Lee Cowan. "Yes," she said. "Well, we're seeing one thing on the news and you're seeing another thing on the news." My response was like, "It's not the news for me, it's my reality. And it's what I see with my own eyes." Tymoshenko went a step further. She sent her pictures of my mom being in a bomb shelter, us fleeing on a packed train, and she blocked me. "She blocked you after you sent her pictures?" Cowan asked. "Not even, 'Are you okay? I don't know what's going on, but are you okay?' None of that." "Yeah," Tymoshenko sighed. "It's shocking for me. Like, I know that everything that they receive is like sort of flipped. They call black white, white black, and that's how they have been living for decades. For those living in Russia, the singularity of the state-run media is impossible to escape. It's beyond understanding. The Russians at home do not understand, just like we do not understand how they cannot know and see what the rest of the world knows and sees." The piece continues. "So, they're buying it, right?" "For the most part," Cowan asks. "It's hard not to buy it," Lofi replied. "They've now blocked Facebook, blocked Twitter. They're slowing down YouTube. Basically, all Russian independent media has been rooted out, or what was left of it was rooted out in the last week. Now that that's gone completely, and it's just state media, Russians can be very good at suffering for a cause they believe just. And I think that's what the Kremlin is counting on. That if they kept telling the Russian people that this is just a war and a war of liberation, people won't rise up and demand change when their economic circumstances get worse and worse, which they will. If there's any good news, experts say, it's that propaganda usually backfires. Cull said, anytime you introduce a distortion into the media environment, somebody has to pick up the tab down the road when it turns out that the world is not as described. And in Ukraine, the first Russians to recognize that may eventually be the invading army itself. Yaffe said, when they roll into Ukraine, they're seeing the resistance. They're seeing how much people hate them. They're seeing tens of thousands of Ukrainians telling them to go home and cursing at them. And it's one of the reasons the advance isn't going very well, because everybody was lied to, and they can see it. The piece concludes with the hope of an end to the conflict and the hope that Russians at home will finally realize the horror Ukrainians are living through. As Russian troops continue their assault, Yulia Tymoshenko hopes that the lies that launched Vladimir Putin's war will one day prove to be the spark that ignites a revolution. Cowan asked, what's the one thing you'd want the average person in Russia to know about what's going on? We fully support those who find courage to speak up and to resist their government, knowing that most likely they will go to jail. Tymoshenko replied, and I just want to hug those people and tell them thank you. We just need more of those kinds of people in Russia to speak up and to stand up against their own dictator. This is so powerful and so sad, but also so true. Even the internet in Russia is not open. Hard to imagine, but the reality. Next up is a column from PMW, Palestinian Media Watch. It's penned by the founder and director of PMW, Itamar Marcus. He really cuts through and offers a sharp analysis of a piece that ran in an official Palestinian paper. Marcus gives powerful insight into the Palestinian view of the world. Everything is seen through their eyes. Very simple and very sad. The title of the column is PA, 2 million Ukrainian refugees is less a tragedy than 2,000 Ukrainian Jews moving to Israel. It was published on March 13th, 2022, subtitled Disaster for One is a Greater Disaster for Another, says official Palestinian Daily. Marcus begins with a touch of humor. He asks the question, what is worse than 2 million Ukrainian refugees and thousands of Ukrainians being murdered? Answer, 2,000 Ukrainian Jews moving to Israel, according to the official PA Daily. And then he continues. The official PA Daily headlined its article about Israel building 1,000 new housing units for Ukrainian Jews with the words, disaster for one, meaning the Ukrainians, is a greater disaster for another, meaning the Palestinians. The phrase is a twist of the Arabic proverb, disaster for one is profit for another. Based on the oft-expressed Palestinian worldview that all international events are to be judged only based on how they impact on Palestinians, the PA Daily sees the tragedy of thousands of murdered Ukrainian civilians and the fight of 2 million refugees as a lesser tragedy than the tragedy of Jewish Ukrainians immigrating to Israel. Moreover, an additional question should be asked. Why should the PA be opposed to Jews immigrating to Israel within the pre-67 ceasefire lines, where Ukrainian refugee immigrants are to be housed? The PA answers this in the first sentence of the article. The World Zionist Organization Settlement Division announced that it has begun the process to establish 1,000 housing units in settlements to absorb Jews fleeing from Ukraine. That's the official daily Al Hayat al-Jadida on March 2nd, 2022. Marcus now quotes extensively from the original article in the Palestinian press in Al Hayat al-Jadida. Headline again, disaster for one is a greater disaster for another. World Zionist Organization Settlement Division announced it has begun the process to establish 1,000 housing units in settlements. As noted below in the article, none of the locations are in the West Bank to absorb Jews fleeing from Ukraine. Chairman of World Zionist Organization Settlement Division, Ishai Merling, revealed that before the outbreak of the Russian-Ukraine war, he formulated a detailed plan to establish temporary housing for Jewish families in Ukraine that are planning to immigrate to Israel. He said that he presented the emergency plan to the World Zionist Organization chairman and acting chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, Yaakov Hagoel. The plan includes housing structures on territories ranging from 55 square meters to 90 square meters, and they will serve as sites for absorbing new Jewish immigrants. According to the emergency plan, the structures will be established in areas next to the northern border in Negev, Arava, the Valley of Springs, that is next to Beit Shan and the Jordan Valley. That actually comes from, that's the quotes from Al Hayat al-Jadida, from the paper itself. It's clearly not in the settlements at all. It's pre-state, pre-67 Israel. This piece is so insightful. It brings out official Palestinian perspective and puts it in perspective for us. Israel is saving people, Jews, non-Jews, from tragedy and probable death, just like they did in the 1970s when they alone offered refuge to Vietnamese boat people who were stranded in the ocean without a place to go. Israel is stepping up, giving refuge to 100,000 Jews and 25,000 non-Jews. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 9 cartoons and memes today. First up is a meme. It reads, I woke up this morning determined to eat right and exercise more. But that was 4 hours ago when I was younger and full of hope. Next up is a funny, biting joke. It is a genre joke, meaning it has been redone in various times and in various places to reflect those various times and places and their needs of the moment. A man in Moscow buys a newspaper, glances at the front page, and throws it away. He does the same thing every day. Eventually the seller snaps, "Why do you do that?" "I'm checking the obituaries," he says. The man asks, "But the obituaries aren't on the front page." The man says, "The one I'm looking for will be." This cartoon is obviously about Putin. I'm calling it a Putin joke because during the Holocaust, the obit being searched for was Hitler. This cartoon, like many others, is about the price of fuel, and I'm going to do a few of those. I want to show a few of these fuel jokes because they're just so funny, and we all have to laugh because the cost is just ridiculous. There's one picture of the cost of gasoline, and the caption reads, "Why Mashiach is coming by donkey." Another meme is a huge billboard. It reads, "Wine now cheaper than gas. Drink, don't drive." Of all the gas jokes, there are hundreds. This is by far the funniest. A man is down on one knee proposing. In his hand is a gas can, far more valuable than a diamond ring. And this last joke is a cartoon of a gas station owner explaining his new price sign. The price of regular is appalling. The plus is obscene. Supreme is holy guacamole. The owner says, "This way I don't have to keep changing or updating the sign." That's funny. Whether they're going to call the next World War, the ad group is proposing WW 3.0. The proposer says sans serif font, and point O screams 21st century. This next cartoon perfectly depicts Putin and the invasion into Ukraine called Z. The caption reads, "If you would like to undo your previous action, press Control Z." Finally, Zelensky is writing, "Never give up," and the shadow of Churchill with his cigar is behind him. That is a profound and true statement. Zelensky has become a modern Churchill. Amazing. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Sometimes people think the world revolves around them. The Palestinians, once again, are the obvious example. Palestinian leadership and laity are worried that the crisis in Ukraine will hurt their cause. And the way that they're perceiving the world is very dangerous. Palestinian leadership is concerned that the conflict will force Palestinians off the front page, and they will need to create reasons to return to center stage. Palestinian leadership has been silent on the matter of Ukraine. And to their benefit, no one is actually looking for Palestinian input or perspective. Palestinian leadership is upset that Israel is receiving 5,000 Ukrainian refugees and opening their country to tens of thousands of temporary Ukrainian residents in need of refuge. Palestinian leadership is concerned that once again Israelis are importing Jews, and they are convinced that these newcomers will usurp Palestinian land. Humanitarian aid for Ukraine seems not to be on their agenda. Israel announced that they have already taken in 25,000 non-Jewish Ukrainians. They will be permitted to stay in Israel permanently or until they want to move on. Israel has also suspended the $3,000 deposit usually requested of non-Jews to make certain that they leave the country. Of the 25,000 Ukrainians, non-Jews in Israel, 20,000 are in Israel illegally already. They will be permitted to legally remain. Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked made the announcement, Israel's law of return usually offers citizenship only to people with at least one Jewish grandparent. But this is not a usual circumstance. And Israel needs to act to save lives. Shaked summed it up when she said, "The sights of war in Ukraine and the suffering experienced by its citizens rattle the soul and don't allow us to remain indifferent. Ukrainians are not the only newcomers to Israel. Over 300 Russian Jews arrived in Israel and made Aliyah. They came to live in Israel permanently in 48 hours. Israel is expecting many more from Russia and Ukraine." Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused others to look at their local border conflicts that could explode at any moment. Specifically, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis agreed to talks in Istanbul to keep communication channels open and to improve ties despite their disagreements. Turkey and Greece carry a special responsibility within the security of Europe. And it's very important that this Russian invasion of Ukraine not tilt the balance. They both acknowledge that regional cooperation will benefit everyone. Turkey and Greece have been sworn enemies for decades, but Ukrainian-Russian conflict has graphically illustrated for them how conflict can savage a country. Russia is starting to suffer in real terms in Ukraine, and one clear sign is that proud Russia has begun asking for international assistance. Specifically, quoting U.S. officials, the Financial Times reported that Russia has asked China for military equipment to support its invasion of Ukraine. According to the report, the White House was concerned that Beijing may undermine Western efforts to help Ukrainian forces defend their country. Obviously, the United States is concerned, but there's nothing that they can do about it. There's no question that China is one of, if not the only country, that has any influence on Russia. And China is one of the only countries Russia can comfortably ask for help. In response, China has told Russia that it is time to de-escalate in Ukraine. We must wait and see if China will, in the end, help Russia, and more importantly, if Russia will listen to the advice given them by China. Water is an essential in life and the life of any society, certainly a country. For Israel, the main source of fresh water is the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Kinneret. After some rough, dry seasons, the Kinneret has slowly been battling back and rising to capacity. For the sake of safety, as a precaution, Israel also desalinates water. That's just in case there's not enough fresh water. Israel's Water and Sewage Authority has reported that the Sea of Galilee has risen by no less than 7 centimeters recently and stands at 209.53 meters. Only 0.73 meters. That's about 36 inches short of capacity. That's a miracle. For years, analysts have predicted that the next war in the Middle East would be about water. Keeping the Kinneret high lends important security to Israel. The Russian oligarchs made their billions with the support of Putin. The president of Russia is a partner in all that they control. And now the oligarchs are being sanctioned. Israel's Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Museum has suspended a strategic relationship with Roman Abramovich, an Israeli-Russian oligarch who has faced sanctions abroad since the eruption of the Ukraine conflict. It was only last month that Yad Vashem announced that Abramovich pledged funding would strengthen its endeavors in areas of Holocaust research and remembrance. The Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, survives on donations, and Abramovich's pledge was more than substantial. It is courageous and ethical for Yad Vashem to take a stand and turn down his money. The world is evolving. International relations are advancing. Alliances we never would have expected are being forged. Aviv Kolkavi is the chief of staff of the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, and he visited Bahrain for a series of meetings with top security officials in the Persian Gulf Kingdom. Kolkavi was accompanied by the head of IDF's Iran Directorate, Tal Kalman. Kolkavi's visit came just a few weeks after Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, visited Bahrain. During that visit, a security cooperation agreement between Israel and Bahrain was signed. There is little doubt as to what Israelis and Bahrainis are speaking about and sharing: Iran, 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 and Islamic terror. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I mentioned obituaries earlier as a part of a joke, and there are many jokes about the death of tyrants. Most of them are Jewish jokes, you should note, and some of them are actually very funny Jewish jokes. Here's one I'm sure that you know. If you don't know, you'll say this over to people who weren't watching tonight. Hitler goes to an astrologist to ask when he is going to die. So Hitler asks the astrologist, "Do you know the day I'm going to die?" "Of course," the astrologist says. "Well, what day am I going to die?" "Sir, you're going to die on a Jewish holiday." "Mein Gott," he says, "that's terrible. What Jewish holiday am I going to die on?" The answer is, any day you die is going to be a Jewish holiday. In Judaism, a eulogy is a tremendous act of respect for a person who just died. And Abraham is the first person in the Bible to deliver a eulogy. He eulogizes his wife Sarah in Genesis and Bereshit 23:2, Kaf Gimel. and he cries. And the word, as it's written in the Torah, is livkotah. The letter kaf is smaller than the other letters, as it's written in the Bible itself, in the Torah itself. There are many explanations that are given for this textual anomaly, and they are trying to explain why it happens. The best explanation is probably that the loss of a loved one, Sarah in this case, it diminished Abraham. Sure, it made him cry, but even more so, the loss of his wife transformed Abraham. Transformed him. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.